Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earliest crimes. But before we talk crime, let's talk coloring. Today I am using this stamp set from Sweet November Stamps. It is a new company to me and a new stamp set in my collection, and it is called Simple Room Reading Nook Add-ons. Okay. I'm going to be using the lamp, the chair, and one of the plants. I'm going to create a one-layer scene card on this piece of Neenah Classic Crest 80-pound cardstock that has been trimmed down to 4 by 5 1/4. In order to make a one-layer scene card, I need to use some masking, so I'll be using Gina K Masking Magic. When you are creating a one-layer scene card, it is important to layer your scene from the front of the image backwards, so you stamp frontward to back. Sometimes I stamp those images out on scrap paper to determine where I want them to be. Today, I'm just lining the stamps up in my MISTI and figuring that all out. Now, it does kind of end up a little bit off-centered once I get the plant in there, but I don't hate it. I did create the look of a wall with a Crafter's Workshop brick wall stencil and just some ink blending to create the floor. There are parts of the coloring that were not visible. I accidentally hit the zoom in on my camera, so I edited those out, like the coloring of the parts of the plant pot you can see. You will see that at the end of the video. Also, full disclosure, this is probably the third time I stamped this. The first time, I did not line the floor up properly with the back feet of the chair, so my perspective was off. The second time, I forgot to put my masks down. So, in full disclosure, this was not my first out of the gate creation of this card. It was a creation of pure stubbornness and determination. But anyways, now that we've talked about the coloring, let's go ahead and jump on into the crime. Our alphabetical journey today takes us to the state of Wisconsin. I'm going to apologize up front. I'm a little bit allergy affected today. The pollen in my area is crazy. My dog is going nuts because, well, she's insane. And my chair's kind of squeaky today. So, our journey today takes us to the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin was became a territorial possession in 1783 after the Revolutionary War, but remained in British control until after the War of 1812. The Wisconsin Territory was created by Congressional Act in April of 1836, and Wisconsin gained statehood on May 29, 1848 as the 30th state, so just 10 or so years before the Civil War. Nearly 21 million gallons of ice cream are consumed by Wisconsinites each year, and in fact, the first ice cream sundae was concocted in Two Rivers, Wisconsin in 1881. Green Bay is known as the toilet paper capital of the world, and something to do with football. Sun Prairie Sweet Corn Festival is one of the largest of its kind in the nation. The first circus in the U.S. was in Wisconsin. Sheboygan is the bratwurst capital of the world, which seems a little disingenuous because there's that whole Germany thing, but I don't know, I didn't count them. If all of the hunters on opening day of deer season in Wisconsin were grouped together at one place and one time, they would comprise the sixth greatest army in the world. The sixth largest army in the world. That's a lot of hunters on opening day. According to Wisconsin Stories, Wisconsin contains more ghosts per square mile than any other state in the nation, which kind of sort of goes along with our story today. We're going to talk about the disappearance of Conradian Olson. Conradina Wilhelmine Eliza Heitman was born on September 12, 1871 in Green Garden, Michigan, to her parents Carl and Christine Heitman. There's a lot of names in there, like Carl Christian David Heitman and Christine Augusta Conradina Steidenhoop or Steidentoop. It was spelled two ways. Now, Carl and Christine were born in Germany. And at some point in time, they immigrated and were living in Michigan when Conradina, who I'm going to call Connie because I always mispronounce her name, was born. And she is the oldest of her parents' two children, both daughters. There is not a lot of information on the early life of Connie, which is another interesting point to our story because our story was on that TV show, Unsolved Mysteries. What I do know is that her disappearance continued to be investigated by a great-granddaughter, and she is the one responsible for getting Connie's story on Unsolved Mysteries. So anyway, back to the story. Connie grew up and somewhere in time met a gentleman named Carl Johan Hjalmar Olson. Now, he has the same first name as Connie's father. So when I say the name Carl, I am referring to Carl, her husband, or the man who became her husband, not her father. So Carl Olson was born on January 3rd, 1861 in Sweden to Gustav and Emma Olson. He was their only child, and I don't know when. I could not find immigration records for them either, but the Olson family immigrated to the U.S. before he met Connie. So then Connie and Carl met at some point in time and were married on June 4th, 1892 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So he was 30 to her 21. And for a minute that was like, what? But then I remembered that it wasn't so uncommon for younger women to marry older established men because they had to prove to the lady's father that they could support their children, right? So I put that weird fact on that shelf in my brain and moved on with the story. Carl actually worked as a railroad coachman while they were married. And they would go on to have 4 children, 3 boys and 1 girl who was their youngest. Now, it was reportedly a well-known opinion, fact, rumor, whatever, that the marriage between Connie and Carl wasn't easy or even happy. In that day and time, divorce because you weren't happy wasn't really a thing. It was more frequent for somebody who was unhappy in their marriage to just walk away and start over. It was also rumored that there was abuse between Carl and Connie, or abuse of Connie by Carl, and also toward the children. And again, that's another thing in the early 1900s that wasn't discussed publicly. It was not addressed at all. So one day in 1910, Connie boarded a train to Brookfield, Wisconsin, telling her children that she was headed into Milwaukee for a dentist appointment. She was going to stay the night and plan to return the next day. She asked her oldest son, then 14-year-old Edwin, if he wanted to go with her, but he declined and chose to stay home with his siblings. And that was the last time Connie was seen, like ever. Like ever. Some people assumed that she had just walked away from this unhappy marriage. As a mama, I can't imagine leaving my children behind in that kind of a situation. But then again, we don't actually know what the situation was. We know what the rumor said the situation was, that marriage was like. So Edwin reportedly regretted not accompanying his mother until the day that he died in 1966. Like, he felt like things would have been different had he gone with her. It's his daughter, Geneva Fuscher, F-U-C-H-S-E-R, Fuscher, who reignited the investigation into the disappearance of Connie. And that's because her father had so much regret about the disappearance of his mom. Now, for a long time in her life, Geneva believed that Connie left on her own accord. But then she began to have some different thought processes. And I suppose through investigation or whatever, she started having a different thought about that. Geneva began to feel like Connie was lured or taken and that something bad had happened to her. And this is kind of where we're picking up in this unusual story, because unfortunately, this is the information we have about Connie's disappearance. In the 1980s, Geneva and her husband owned and operated a gift shop in South Sioux City, Nebraska. And in September of 1985, a woman came into the shop and spent some time browsing around the shop. Now, Geneva says that normally she just let her customers walk around and look unless they ask for specific help. But she was immediately intrigued by this particular shopper. She felt some unexplained link to her or a connection, or was drawn to her in some way. Eventually, this woman approached Geneva and gave her name as Susanna Stickney, and that she was looking for a Pegasus. And while they were chatting, Susanna told Geneva that she was a psychic. And according to Geneva, out of the blue, Susanna said, quote, "You want to ask me about your grandmother, don't you?" End quote. And I think it's actually, I think I called her a great-granddaughter. I think it's just a granddaughter. Her father was Edwin. So yeah, just a granddaughter, not great-granddaughter. Anyway. Now, Geneva admits that she was taken back by this woman's blunt question, but when she was asked if she had anything that belonged to Connie, Geneva was able to hand her the marriage license and a wedding picture. And when she had done that, Susanna said, quote, "Now don't talk, be very quiet," end quote. And she looked at the photo and the license and then closed her eyes and I guess did her psychic thing. Okay. So Susanna told Geneva that she saw Connie get on the train. She also said that she saw crying children and Connie being beaten. Then Susanna said she believed that Carl knew what happened to his wife. And Geneva said she was surprised to hear those specific details from Susanna and agreed to meet her again at her office. So when they met later in Susanna's office, Geneva was given more possible clues about Connie's disappearance. Susanna told her that she would soon receive a packet of old letters, and the letters would pinpoint the year that Connie disappeared. Susanna told Geneva that the name Ellis was somehow connected to the disappearance and that Connie was buried in an unmarked grave. Susanna then also told Geneva that within a year, she would be getting a letter from an unknown source, a person she had not ever met before, and that person would tell her where the grave was. Okay, so I'm reading this story and I'm going, yeah, bullocks, right? Whatever. This is not something that I have a deep... I believe that there are some people who have a gift of inspiration and visitations, but yeah, sometimes I think it's just people being people. Anyway, my opinions aside, several weeks after that meeting in Susanna's office, her predictions started becoming true. So Geneva received in the mail a packet of old letters and pictures from Connie's nieces and nephews. Most of the contents of the packet were from the 1800s. The old letters confirmed that there was some dissension, for lack of a better word, in Carl and Connie's marriage, and that substantiated, and the letters proved that the last time anybody saw Connie was, or heard from her even, was in 1910. So Geneva was encouraged by this information and she stepped up the search for more information. She actually sent a letter detailing the things that she was searching for to some Midwestern newspapers. I think more than one. And there was an editor of a paper that found the story interesting and then printed Geneva's letter to him. So Geneva writes the editor said, "This is an interesting story. I'm going to put this out there. We'll see what happens," kind of thing, right? Well, in the summer of 1987, a man named Bill Carpenter from Fort Scott, Kansas, got a hold of Geneva after reading about her search, the letter that she wrote to the editor, in a monthly magazine. He actually told her about an unmarked grave near the small town of Ellis, Missouri. And he also sent her a newspaper article about it. Do you have goosebumps now? I don't believe I'm really iffy about this kind of stuff, but holy cow. I'm inclined to believe that her contacting Bill had more to do with her writing the letter to the editor, but, skepticism is my middle name sometimes. While Bill was talking to Geneva, he told her about the local legend of this unmarked grave. Now, according to Bill, at the turn of the century, Ellis was a small farming town. And legend tells that a fashionably dressed woman got off the train at Ellis near Highway 43. The woman was seen crying and arguing with a man, and those who saw the disagreement called it a lover's quarrel. It also was reported that the couple stormed east down the tracks. And then the man was seen later returning to the station alone, where he boarded another train and left town. The woman's body was discovered alongside the train tracks 3 days later. She had been beaten and then shot through the heart. And it seems that there was nothing to identify the woman or reveal where she had come from. It was just presumed that she was the woman who had disembarked the train while arguing with the man days before. I'm guessing clothing, maybe. Also, according to the legend, railroad workers then buried her in a field a few yards from where she was found. And for as long as anyone could remember, according to Bill, the grave had been maintained by railroad workers adorned with flowers every Memorial Day. Okay, that's a lot. Now, Connie tells her children that she's going to a dentist in Milwaukee, and then Bill talks about this woman in Missouri. I didn't do the math. I know they're not super far apart, but So Geneva's head is spinning. And when she learned from Bill that the grave was near the train tracks, she could not believe that another one of Susanna's predictions had come true. So Geneva and her husband actually traveled to Missouri to look at the grave and take some photos and visit. And Geneva said that she felt a presence there. Like she felt Connie was there. And her husband took a picture of her by the grave marker. And in the picture, there was this kind of ghostly apparition. And Geneva believes that that was Connie visiting her, that her grandmother was there. That was her burial place. There is a legend that that Geneva talked about that people who die, whose murders aren't solved, hang around their burial place until their murder has been solved or until their family has found them, that kind of thing. And Geneva just really felt like that was what was going on. That this apparition or this bright light in the photograph and the feeling that somebody was there with her, like she was all in. This was where her grandmother Connie was buried. She believed it all the way. Except that there's always an except with these older stories. There was a historian named Pat Brophy, Brophy, and he has some interest in this particular graven story as well. He is very skeptical about Geneva's claim that this was the final resting place of Connie. And he kind of has receipts, okay? So Pat has a newspaper article about an unknown grave dating from before 1910 when Connie disappeared. The one news article in particular that told of the well-dressed woman and the grave, that was published in 1888, 22 years before Connie disappeared. So like about the same time she got married, right? The article stated that the woman's body was discovered on April 21st, 1877. And it described the dead woman as being less than 20 years old. And Connie was 38 when she disappeared. So there's the except, right? Like, Bill has got the dates. He's like, I know, I read your story. This is what I heard. And Geneva's like all in. She's like, this is my grandmother Connie's grave. She is all in. And then there's this historian, Pat, and he's like, yeah, except. Now go back to Bill. Bill has other thoughts. Okay, and this is how come Bill kind of also has receipts. Bill said that around 1950, he personally spoke to an 85-year-old man who had worked for the railroad his entire life. This man, who he did not name, said that the woman they found along the tracks was in her 30s, not less than 20. So Bill 100% believes, based on his conversation with this old railroad worker, that woman was Connie. So even if the dead woman was in her 30s, the first report of this grave still happened before Connie disappeared. And that's like a lot to unpack. Let me go back up to my notes. Connie was born in 71. So if the first mention of this woman was in 1877, she would have been like 6. So I don't know. There's just a lot to unpack. So let's start unpacking things. First, I need to come right out and say that all of the information I could find about Connie's disappearance came from Geneva. Like every link linked back to something that an interview or a transcript or something, some conversation from Geneva. Secondly, from what I could find, the Unsolved Mystery episode that this story appeared on did not result in any new information. Nothing new came. I remember watching Unsolved Mysteries. The third thing we should unpack is that it is assumed that Carl had something to do with Connie's disappearance for more than one reason. Their marriage was publicly known to be less than friendly and privately abusive. And by say privately, I mean people knew it, but nobody talked about it. But also, family members and friends remember that the same time that Connie went to Milwaukee for her dentist appointment, here's my air quotes you can't see, Carl was also missing for a few days. So there's that. Carl never said one way or the other on the record what his involvement was with Connie's disappearance, and he actually died in 1929. It's like 19 years after Connie's disappearance. So fourth thing to unpack here. In an 1888 article that reports the woman found in Ellis, it actually names her as Lula King. And that was, so if that was 1888, that was before Connie and Carl got married. So based on the newspaper article from that time, it seems implausible that the woman found in the grave could be Connie. Unless I suppose, now this is the only thing that my mind came up with. I suppose in theory that if more than one woman had been found somewhere along those tracks within a whatever mile distance, they could have buried them both in the same spot, thinking of it as a weird coincidence. I don't know. So the last thing to unpack here is that Connie's children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and other relatives have actually uploaded their DNA to Ancestry and other websites, but there has never been another trace of Connie found. Now, sadly, on October 4th, 2021, Geneva passed away at the age of 90. So what are your thoughts? Like, I am dying to know what you all think of this story, because I want, like, I have the, so in the site I use for the source, there is the Unsolved Mysteries episode linked, and I intentionally did not watch it before I did the voiceover. I'm going to go back and watch it now because I want to see that episode and see what it says. So here you can see I colored that flower pot with a red stripe along the bottom. I do have a picture. This is Carl and Conradian on, I think it's their wedding picture. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this kind of odd unsolved story. I've added a couple other videos here that I think you would like. I've also added a subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed, I would love it if you did. I want to hear your comments down below. Tell me what you think about this story. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and I hope you have a really fabulous day.